Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Investigamer, and this is a horror review. My favorite. When Amnesia hit the scene, it was intense. Horror fans loved it, YouTubers became famous from it, and developers flocked to Steam in an effort to improve upon its hands-off gameplay style. Very few developers up to this point had the guts to take power away from the player and pit them against unbeatable enemies that could only be overcome by sheer determination and problem solving. Amnesia was a rare mix of atmospheric storytelling and puzzle solving that had scarcely been explored, but has now arguably been beaten to death with the leg of a dead horse. Case in point, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, which most people didn't really like and found to be lacking and uninspired and blah blah blah, myself not included in that group. However, that game wasn't actually developed by the same guys behind Amnesia. No, those dudes have actually been working on an entirely new game for 5 years called SOMA. Well, entirely new may be a bit of an overstatement. You still start the game with little understanding of where you are, you still interact with items in the environment to solve problems, and you're still pitted against enemies you are unable to attack. But is it a good game? Is it better than Amnesia? Does it try new things? All this and more in today's review of SOMA. I'm gonna try my very best to not spoil anything important, but let me give you a quick overview of how our story begins. SOMA starts with a Canadian named Simon who's having his brain scanned using a new experimental technology. Immediately following the scan, he finds himself inside a remote research facility that's decayed into morbid chaos. After exploring for a brief period, you find that this research facility is deep underwater, and that the human race has been largely eradicated thanks to a comet that struck the Pacific Ocean. However, inside the laboratories you find sentient robots, breathing corpses, black goo dripping from the ceiling, tendrils scaling the wall, all of which are pretty rare for your run-of-the-mill horror game. Finally, you come across a female voice that claims to be human, and unleashes a wave of disheartening information unto our protagonist. And from there, it just gets scarier. I'm just gonna come right out with it. I have a ton of fucking good things to say about this game. It is time to sing the praises because there are just so many. To start things off, the largest and most profound area where this game shines is its storytelling. The developers behind SOMA believe fervently in a 4-layer storytelling approach that focuses on gameplay style, progression goals, narrative background, and the player's mental understanding of the game world in order to paint a vivid picture of SOMA's universe. The main dialogue, audio tracks, environmental notes, breakup of challenges, all of this takes into account how the player will perceive and come to understand SOMA's game world. I've included a link in the description section down below to an in-depth article covering the 4-layer storytelling technique if you're interested. It would obviously take me an entire video to cover that subject as a whole, but I think it's safe to say that SOMA has largely benefited from this approach, mainly in its attention to narrative detail. Every segment, every piece of the puzzle, every obstacle you overcome builds upon the central theme of the game and the characters within the story. If you finish SOMA, you will come away from the experience racking your brain over what it all means. You'll reflect upon it at night, it'll be there with you when you go to work. It's the kind of game that just doesn't leave your head when the credits roll. And as I've said many times, this is my favorite kind of game. SOMA has such a breadth of character and emotion that I don't even notice the parts that I would normally consider tedious in a game. I mean, you guys know how much I hate running around flipping fucking switches, and you spend a pretty good portion of the game doing just that in SOMA, yet it doesn't even bother me. There are a number of reasons for this. For one, the menial tasks are actually woven into the progress of the narrative. These tasks are also broken up by really interesting sequences, small puzzles, fast-paced chases, stealthy crawls, and so on. There are just so many story elements that distract you from the gamey moments of SOMA that would normally bring you out of the immersion. Sometimes SOMA doesn't even feel like a game. It feels more like an ominous trek through a bizarre and depressing world that we can scarcely imagine. Oh yeah, SOMA is scary. You'll be introduced to some of the creepiest monsters only found in the deep sleep nightmares of heavy narcotics users. Each creature has its own behavioral patterns, and you'll need to keep your distance to survive the horrors of SOMA. But what makes this horror game better than most is the unsettling atmosphere and tone that follows you from the beginning of the game to the very end. SOMA doesn't have to rely on jump scares and cheap tricks to get a rise out of you. It knows very well what frightens you, and it will exploit that again and again. Conveyance is another overlooked area of game design where SOMA thrives. In a game like this, it is deeply necessary to introduce the player to puzzle-solving elements early on, such as the need to scan your surroundings for information and access terminals in order to progress. It is especially important to accomplish this feat without holding the player's hand, and SOMA does just that. There are plenty of games that would have just explained these mechanisms in a big-ass pop-up window, or directed you to the next objective with a little arrow or a mini-map, but isn't it a lot more rewarding when you just get nudged in the right direction and the player has to figure the rest out for themselves? As I said before, the gameplay is simple. You walk around, interact with items and notes, solve puzzles, and stealthily navigate dark corridors, occasionally throwing a heavy object to distract would-be foes. If you didn't like Amnesia, or you just can't get into games that rely primarily on storytelling, or you just play video games for the entertainment, then this probably is not the game for you, so you should probably just stop the review here. That being said, if you did like Amnesia, you'll probably find SOMA's puzzles and problem-solving arcs to be in a tier of their own. It never feels tedious, it never feels overdone, and the tone is always there, brooding over you as you progress. This is not a game for the faint of heart. This is a game for someone who wants to thrust themselves into their own nightmares. It will make you question what it means to be a being, what it means to be human, what the point of life is, where does life end and begin, what is consciousness? All of this and much, much more. Okay, sounds good, but are there any drawbacks? I mean, certainly there's gotta be some drawbacks, right? Well, I played SOMA on the PC, and I do have to say it was having a serious screen tearing problem when I first started out, especially when I tried to record my gameplay with Fraps. After messing around with VSync a little bit and finding a balance with the frame rate, I did see these problems drop significantly. But apart from that, I can't really think of any area where this game actually failed. I mean, I can think of some little things. For example, I probably would have liked the game even more if the ratio of puzzles to switch flipping was higher, but it was by no means bad. I would have also liked to see them focus a little more on the game's central antagonist, but I think they put more emphasis on the player's main objective for good reason. The stakes are enormously high for Simon and his quest, and spending more time on the antagonist would have distracted from that. So they mainly explored that front using background story. Notes, audio logs, that sort of thing. I really want to go more into detail about the central antagonist, but it would obviously lead to some pretty heavy spoilers, and I have to avoid that at all costs. I mean, the story is just so damn good. But I will try to do a discussion vlog on that topic for those of you who might be interested. Needless to say, I really don't have much bad things to say about this game. I know, it's unusual, it's rare for me, but that's the truth of the matter, guys. SOMA is an absolutely breathtaking horror game. A game with a setting and atmosphere the likes of which I can hardly recall in other media. A game that takes layered storytelling to a whole new level, and I deeply hope that it'll inspire other developers to do the same. It is largely without faults, without weaknesses, and without complaints. At only $30 on Steam, this horror game is well worth the price tag, and I proudly award it my third ever 5 out of 5. What did you think of SOMA? Let me know in the comment section down below, where questions, comments, and opinions are always welcome and will always be read. I'm the Investigamer. Never trust the crowd, only the investigation. See you later, dudes and duders. Have a good evening.